core damage. There's already leaking water all over the plant, all of actually 4 of the plants. So anything clean, like clean rainwater, going into the plant is going to come out contaminated beyond belief, and that's what we're finding. And we're talking about terabecquerels worth of radiation coming out, and that's what was just from clean rainwater. So the reason why some sort of a structure has to be built around it is simply to prevent runoff and contamination further than we are seeing right now. One of the other systems that they were trying, which is not working, by the way, is to recirculate the most contaminated water from all 4 systems and to recirculate it back into the cores so that you can use it as a coolant. Now, there's some big problems with this. Remember, I said these are flimsy replacement systems that were designed to mimic the functions of the existing systems in the plant. No, it does not work as well as expected. When they say that we're going to achieve cold shutdown, well, it's not going to happen. First of all, cold shutdown is a myth anyway at those plants because they are waste generation facilities. They are no longer power plants, and that only applies to power plants. So at this point in time, since the filtration systems that they're trying to use to recirculate the water are cutting out, breaking, and they're not really functioning up to their up to what, well, really, there's no way for it to happen. They can't just toss together a system to do this. They have to pump in clean water to cool the cores. Now, when that happens is, sure, you pump in the clean water, and then it collects because it all runs out like a sieve. They're collecting that, and now they're pumping those into something called MegaFloat, which is their giant-sized, that pier, or the floating pier that they positioned in place to use as a huge tank. Now, is this good or is it bad? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's more of a controlled release. What do you do with that when it's filled up? Do they bring it over to California or something and release it there? It still has to come out, and it's still radioactive particles. So unfortunately, this is why I was extremely concerned way back on March 11th. I know you've had me on your program for hours, and my story hasn't changed. I said, this is the reason why I'm concerned. The plant is no longer a plant. It's a waste generation facility. There's no way to contain it, and even if anyone's trying to paint a rosy picture about its containability, forget about it. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
Right, we estimate the amount of radiation initially was 100 times Chernobyl, according to Dr. Chris Busby in his filter study, where he took actual air filters from automobiles around Japan and in the Fukushima prefecture and nearby prefectures right down to Tokyo. They estimate between 300 and 1,000 times worse than Chernobyl, and it's not stopping. It's a continuous stream of radiation coming out of there all the time. Radioiodine-131, xenon-133, cesium-137, strontium-90, plutonium, uranium, I mean, you name it. This place is generating tons and tons of billions of becquerels of radiation literally every hour. And tritium, like, you better beat the band. It's unbelievable. As it hit the groundwater table, which we know the corium is going right through the bottom. When we come back, we're going to talk about this more and what's happening at the NRC here. Welcome back. So, Chris, I guess we'll summarize that Fukushima is really bad and it's getting worse. That Japan basically now they have radioactive beef and yellowfin tuna, vegetables spread all over the northern Japan. According to Chris Busby, he mentioned this offshore effect of radioisotopes continuing to be being recirculated by just the tidal action that'll spread north and south along the entire eastern coast of Japan, not just Honshu, but all the islands. That the black current will carry that out toward the Humboldt Current, toward Alaska, down the coast of Canada and America over the next number of months. That the radiation plumes continue to assault the whole northern hemisphere. And by the way, don't be too smug in the southern hemisphere. It'll take another 6 to 18 months, but you'll be irradiated too. And the situation is they haven't put what I call a flexible shroud, which would have been a Kevlar spider silk shroud over the area rather than the steel one. At least they're covering it with something. They haven't built trenches and got underneath there to build what I call trenches and trenches, like Dr. Busby said, to literally catch this corium, which is getting into the water table, because all they had to do, they had to build a foundation literally on sand, if you want to call it, in order to even build the Fukushima prefecture reactors. They had them stacked on top of each other, which was stupid. They need to have more space there between them for isolation. And, of course, if any one of these reactors completely goes, quote, Fukushima nuclear, in a nuclear explosion, which could well happen, not just the micronuclear explosions that are with interaction between high-temperature zirconium and these radioisotope particles down in the underneath the reactor, we're likely to see superheated steam go for kilometers, miles away from the site. We're going to see plumes of radiation coming there for decades. They're even saying if they can invent it. And then on top of that, we now have the dangers of what's going on in America. What's the latest on Fort Calhoun and the Burnsville reactor down there? And what's happening?
Fort Calhoun is still experiencing some pretty ridiculous flooding right now. And I did catch JR's report from an insider that he knows saying that that plant may not actually start up again. I was really considering that, and I did my own research on it, and said, you know what, that guy's actually right. And here's the reasons why it's right. And once again, I'm going to go back to what we discussed on Fort Calhoun, and I was very concerned about submerged cables, as electrical cables that go to the intake structure of that plant. And I know that we've discussed that on your program, and it's archived. And I said those are not really meant. Those particular electrical cables are not designed and meant to be submarine cables. And there's a whole different world and a whole different class of cables for that. And I said they're going to have to inspect areas of that plant, including those cables, and they'll probably have to do some sort of replacement of cables. That is extremely arduous task. It's very expensive, and what it's going to come down to is going to have to come down to a cost analysis. Like, is it worth it? Now, that plant did just recently get a renewed license, so that I suspect that they may spend the money on that. But this is very interesting. Here's why. It's the first time I've ever heard of a plant undergoing or subject to earth changes such as flooding when the plant was not actually damaged or operating at the time, that would have to be mothballed because of earth changes. I mean, this is really significant. This actually is a shake to our foundation of what normal is and what normal will be. So that plant right now is in a configuration that would probably be the safest. That is, the reactor head is off. Some of the fuel is not in and we've discussed this, is in the spent fuel pool, and some of it is in the reactor. I've already outlined a lot of recommendations for Omaha Public Power, and that would be to make sure that the seal around the reactor flange is intact, because that's the only thing holding the water on the refueling cavity above the reactor. That's the only thing holding it in. However, if the transfer tube of the refueling pool to the reactor cavity is open at this point, you could actually get water in there by lots of different ways to keep the reactor core cool right now. So I'm not really concerned about that. But what I am concerned with is that this plant has already lost the summer of prime time peak electrical generation for the grid. It's gone. The summer is going to be over real soon. That plant may not actually ever run again, and that's a big expense. It's a big cost. And also the replacement power is coming from really expensive sources.
Now, that's the Fort Calhoun plant, right? Now, what about now that plant is in which city?
That one is north of Omaha.
Oh, north of Omaha. Now, there's also the other plant.
South of Omaha, and that would be...
There's one in Burnsville. What's that one plant called?
Cooper.
In Nebraska? Cooper. What's happening in Cooper? Because I think the Cooper plant is... what's interesting to me, and I talked to various people, and they tell me they've had a drought in the Midwest, but there's something wrong with the ground being as hard as a rock, but yet there's flooding downriver. What's going on there? Is it just a massive surge of water? Is it mismanagement? What's happening?
Yeah, Ann could help me with that. I have a feeling that it has to do with a lot of melt that's beginning to see right now. It has to do with
it's 2 months late too,
because engineers operating their flood control gates and things like that.
Yeah, I think they're operating them on an older paradigm, because what I'm hearing from people up in, say, North Dakota and other states like Minnesota, there's drought there, yet we're having these flooding further south like in Nebraska. And it just, things don't add up. Either there's a mismanagement or there's a combination of that, and odd times when the waters are coming down. Literally, the flood belt is 2 months late, so it's not even going to peak at the end of June. It's going to peak at the end of August, which is really unusual. I want to segue this nuclear issue into one quick question, then we're going to get into Alexander Bachman's analysis of the danger of this nuclear terror events. We have... what's the NRC doing in the MIT report? Can you summarize in a minute or two what's happening with the NRC. Are they actually going to increase the power from, say, 4 hours to 2 weeks? Are they going to increase safety procedures and put the money in, force these companies, not just kind of say, maybe it's a good idea if you want to do it? Are they going to force these nuclear reactors to actually increase safety so that they're not going to have a Fukushima event here from, extreme weather, a nuclear terror activity, which can happen easily, lightning strike to power grids, tornadic activity, anything that can happen. They're not really, I don't see any movement that's happening at a reasonable pace to protect America from these reactors going Fukushima.
To be as brief as possible, 5 commissioners, one of them came out with the same kind of recommendations that we've been discussing, more power, more time, more diverse power supplies, and the other ones voted that down, pending further study.
So the NRC basically are sitting on their hands until a whole lot of Americans become radioactive or die. Okay.
Like I said, I don't really understand the reason why, but to me, we've talked before. I'm always with the guys at the plant because I'm one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why we got to listen to you people like you.
We know what we want. We live through the plant. We go through the simulator scenarios. We understand what we need. So
yeah, exactly. I want to segue this, and so stay right there. Alexander, you've got some very shocking reports. Now, back in 1997, after working with Special Forces in Delta, I spent an entire week in St. Louis with the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and we had a conjoint session with Special Forces and nuclear agents working for the U.S. government. And I spent literally almost every evening talking to them about terror dangers and sharing my reports from the guys